It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is here. Happy New Year to you, sir.
Happy New Year to you, too.
All right, Happy New Year as well to Dov Alfon, former editor-in-chief of the Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you as well. Emre Demir, former editor of Zaman France. How are you?
Thank you. Happy New Year.
And France24.com's Lila Jacinto. Bonne année.
Bonne année.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. They seem to come out of the blue. Anti-government demonstrations across Iran flaring up a little over a week ago, the biggest since the 2009 post-electoral protests that were mostly in Tehran at the time. The ordinary citizens that make up the rank and file of the regime's support, fed up with the growing cost of living and high unemployment. This time, the protest started not in the capital, but in the second city, Mashhad, and then spread to 80 cities and towns quickly. The chants also directed at Iran's presence abroad. Leave Syria, think about us was one slogan. Another, death to Hezbollah. Did you see this at all coming, Lila Jacinto?
I did not see it coming, but it's not really such a surprise. You know, the Iranian people have risen up against the establishment. They did it before in the Shah's time, and they did it in 2009. I didn't see it coming quite in Mashhad, but, you know, in retrospect, you know, if you look where Mashhad is, it's very close to the border with Afghanistan. You know, that's where a lot of Afghan youth and they're being taken into the Syrian battlefield. So, the economic situation is hurting there, and they are really seeing the regime put in a lot of money into these overseas military campaigns. So, yes, and of course, coming in the heels of Rouhani's tightening measures, I can see this coming. I did not see it escalating to down with the regime. That we did not see in 2009. In 2009, the figures who were calling for these demonstrations were very much part of the establishment, but asking for reform. So these appear to be really young people who have not probably learned the lessons of 2009. So it seems pretty organic, regardless of what the Supreme Leader said.
Yeah, and 21 killed so far, Christopher Dickey. It's interesting that it seems to now have subsided a bit, but is it just a wildfire that has gone away?
Well, Iranian politics are extremely complicated, and one of the explanations for what happened is that the original demonstrations in Mashhad were actually organized by people on the ultra-conservative, hardline part of the political spectrum to embarrass the more moderate President Rouhani and his government, because people, clearly there is a lot of discontent. The economy is not going well. People felt that things would open up after the Iran nuclear deal, that there would be a lot more jobs, a lot more money. That hasn't happened. People are asking why, but there are lots of different forces trying to exploit that. Once you opened that Pandora's box, however, you had these eruptions all over the country. And now, of course, the regime, particularly the Revolutionary Guards, are insisting that this is all a plot by the Israelis, the Saudis, and the Americans working together. But I don't think the Iranian people are buying that.
I mean, then the one thing is we really don't know if these hardliners did indeed call for it, but there's a perception that it has, and which leads to the fact that Rouhani will probably come on top of this, because his supporters are absolutely blaming the hardliners, who were his biggest opposition, you know, given that the nuclear
as
sanctions.
I said, Iranian politics are very complicated.
Complicated, in any case, the genie's out of the bottle, or was at least. We will see whether it persists.
There had been demonstrations. BBC Persian service did some very good reporting. There had been demonstrations in a lot of these little cities and towns that nobody ever heard of outside Iran, going back quite a ways. There had been discontent. So it isn't as if nothing ever happened and then everything exploded by design. It wasn't that way at all.
Emre Demir, a country that since that international agreement to break out of its isolation has seen double-digit growth, talk of all these business delegations. A lot of that growth, though, in the oil sector. Is Iran a giant with feet of clay?
Of course.
what struck me most that we've also seen demonstrations in the cities like Qum, the cities, all other cities, considered as the strongholds of the regime. So that was striking, and considering the fact that Iran is, trying to open its economy to other countries, to Europe, to France, to Turkey. There's also an important, economic relationship between two countries. So it was really interesting, and I think that the economic reasons wasn't the only, the operative word here. There was other aspirations for this, for Iranian people.
Davafan, you share that?
Look at the four regional powers of this part of the world: Iran, Turkey, Israel, and Saudi. Now, we've seen very strange political maneuvering in Saudi. We're seeing demonstration in the streets of Tel Aviv with thousands and 20,000 really demonstrators every Saturday night for the same reason as the Iranian people is walking, saying that the economy is booming, but it's not tripping down and they have problems with paying the rent. And so and Turkey, of course.
Inequalities.
Yeah. So we are seeing the four regional powers in the Middle East on the verge of suddenly listening to the people in the streets, and the people have something to say about that. It's fascinating.
And we're seeing the price of oil start to rise. Is that good or bad news?
Well, it depends on if you own, what stock do you own? Stability is important in a volatile region. So I think that a bit of, it's a surge in price oil is not a catastrophe right now.
All right, the U.S. response has been to slap fresh sanctions, call for a UN Security Council session, an idea rejected not only by the likes of Russia, but also France, whose president expressed wariness in his New Year's greetings to the press on Wednesday, both of over the repressive nature of Iran's regime, but also he doesn't want Emmanuel Macron, he says, to get sucked into too much Tehran bashing. Otherwise, quote, what's playing out surreptitiously is the rebuilding of an axis of evil. We can see it in the official line carried by the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, which are our allies on many points. It's almost a line that will lead us to war in Iran. Leila Jacinto, your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because, with the axis of evil, he's sort of going back to the neocons of the Bush administration. Obama, of course, during the 2009 demonstrations, backed off from being seen to be involved in the Iranian protests. It seems like Macron is pretty much taking on the baton now that Washington is in disarray.
Taking on the baton, however, his foreign minister delayed a visit to Tehran that was to pave the way for a visit by the French president to Iran this week. When's the right time for Macron to go there?
Well, it's the start of a year. We really don't know what is going to be happening. As you say, that there are some tricky games and balancing acts in that region, notably Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and with Iran. And Macron seems to be forging ahead on his diplomatic missions. Today he's meeting the Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So I wouldn't put it past him to try and open something on Iran. We are really expecting Donald Trump to come up with a statement on the nuclear deal. So, probably Paris could be waiting for what is the response from DC to move forward.
Emre Demir, the Turkish president this week, through his spokesperson, unequivocally bashing Donald Trump for trying to press this before the Security Council, even though Iran and Turkey are at opposite ends when it comes to the Syria conflict. On this issue, Ankara sides with the government in Tehran.
Of course, not only on this issue. For example, the Turkish government supports Iranian regime, backs actually the Iranian regime regarding to these protests, what we're talking about. But when it comes to the question of Jerusalem, Erdogan is trying to incarnate this, the leader of the Muslim world thing, and he. Actually, in Turkey, a lot of people believes that it was Erdogan behind this decision. China, Germany, France, all of these countries followed Erdogan's lead, and they voted against, against Trump. So this is the narrative in Turkey. So he plays on this ground. It's an important story for him. He always he was actually the champion of this Palestinian cause. So it's not a surprise that Iran and Turkey is on the same page on this particular subject.
Is he angry at the United States over Jerusalem, or is he angry over that trial we saw this week with guilty verdicts handing down to a senior executive at state-owned Hauptbank? The star witness in that trial was, of course, a man who says that Erdogan himself gave orders to flout those Iran sanctions.
Yeah, we're talking about Reza Zarrab case, and that might have played a role.
Might have played a role.
A little,
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think Erdogan often looks like he's just a mass of seething resentments toward the United States for everything from that trial to various actions of the United States in the region, particularly support of a group in Syria that's closely allied to the PKK rebels in Turkey, plus the fact that Mr. Gulen is still in the United States, living comfortably in the Poconos. All of that makes Erdogan crazy. It upsets him a lot, and he lashes out all the time. Actually, I would love to be in the room sometime watching Erdogan and Trump going at each other, because they're two conspicuously unbalanced people.
Unbalanced.
Yes.
Unpredictable.
Both.
Both. Yeah.
Like Bannon, losing their minds.
And we saw actually this Friday, Lila Jacinto mentioning Erdogan here in Paris. We saw this Friday. At one point, a journalist asks Erdogan about that report that was from a Turkish newspaper about arms shipments to radicals in Syria back in 2014. Listen to the response.
You speak like a follower of Fethullah Gulen with the same arguments.
Je parle comme un journaliste français.
No, not like a journalist. You speak exactly like a member of the Gulen movement. Why? Because those who led this operation were people tied to that group. Today they've been arrested. They're in prison.
So his answer is no.
Emre Demir?
I mean, what can I say? If you can't understand why thousands of journalists, researchers, intellectuals are in prison in Turkey, you have to listen to this answer. It's a revelation. If you want to understand Erdogan's position on terrorism, how he conceives terrorists. For example, this French journalist Laurent, who asked the question, if we were in Ankara today, if this press conference was held in Ankara, he would be in prison right now. So because of this question, it has been years that he didn't receive a question like this from a Turkish journalist.
Dov Alfan, at the same press conference, the Turkish president calling newspaper columnists the gardeners of terrorism. Should Emmanuel Macron have pressed him a little bit harder?
No, I think he did the right tone is there. I think it's already huge that he declared, in front of the president of Turkey, what he declared. It's calibrated, calculated words. I think it's enough. It's a clash of really two cliches. It's the French elegance of words and the Ottoman respect and arrogance. And it's pretty cool for me that the things were said. And also, of course, he clearly said that Turkey will not be part of the EU. Only a kind of partnership is coming up. So we are in front of a French answer that is clear. He linked the arrest of journalists to the fact that Turkey will not be anytime soon a member of the Union. I think it's very important.
By the way, a footnote, a lot of Turkish readers think that the French journalist question is me. Wasn't me. I wasn't there.
You were sitting here.
Yeah, I'm sitting here.
Because Zaman is one of the newspapers that's been closed down by the government. Yeah. And so, yeah, good
Do you wish it was you? No.
Well, but the critical thing about this visit to France by Erdogan, a lot of the people that I've been speaking to in the opposition, this is the HDP, the Kurdish party, are absolutely in despair that this invitation happened, this visit happened.
But are you convinced by what Dov just said?
I have to say so, because I watched the press conference and Macron did not yield. He was pretty strong on his human rights record, and also, what's critical and what we have to look at is this defense, the missile defense deal, because what's happening in Turkey right now is that it's getting closer to Russia, and this was a contract that now they announced this that Turkey will be looking at a Franco-Italian consortium for this missile defense shield. This is very important because they have bought a Russian defense shield. Turkey, of course, is a NATO country. So, there are big questions at play. NATO members were extremely alarmed by this purchase of these Russian defense because it involves technology transfers, those kind of things. So Macron is really looking at a very strategic overview of where does Turkey stand.
You talk about Iran being complicated. Here we're talking about a nation, Turkey, which is inside of NATO, but doing arms deals with Russia.
And also the repository, according to many reports, of at least 50 nuclear weapons left there by the United States at Incirlik Air Base. Mm-hmm. So it's a very dangerous situation. Let's just add that for much of 2014, 2015, Turkey had what seemed to be a rather cozy relationship with the Islamic State as well, with a lot of transiting of Turkey by Islamic State fighters coming from Europe and elsewhere, a lot of back and forth, and constantly denying that there was any problem when, in fact, anyone who was reporting on the border...
Yeah, but is that actively active collusion or simply that they didn't want ISIS to be... It wasn't their priority?
Well, yeah. You're right. They have different priorities. Their priority is to crush the PKK. That's their concern. That's understandable. But the priority, when you have ISIS doing what it was doing, to be in at least tacit collusion with them, if not active collusion with them, other people moving through Turkey, is something that's very hard to forgive.
And also very critical now. I mean, we also look at the larger picture. Angela Merkel, Germany has a lot of interest in Turkey, but there's no government there right now. So Macron, and relations between Washington and Ankara have completely gone down the toilet. So, but Turkey is extremely important. You've got the migrant issue. It's the route through Syria. So, I thought Macron played a very interesting diplomatic...
We've seen him do that before. We saw him do it with Putin, for instance.
Yeah.
When we come back, we're going to contrast Emmanuel Macron's week with that of another president. Stay with us.